Last with us in September of last year, Paul Selig is considered to be one of the most foremost spiritual channels working today. In his number of breakthrough works on channel literature, including I Am the Word and Resurrection, he has recorded an extraordinary program for personal and planetary evolution as humankind awakens to its own divine nature. Born in New York City, Paul received his master's degree from Yale. A spiritual experience in 1987 left him clairvoyant. Paul served on the faculty of NYU for 25 years, directed the graduate writing program at Goddard College, and offers channeled workshops internationally. He lives on Maui. We'll talk to him about that tragedy out there, where he maintains a private practice as an intuitive and conducts frequent live stream seminars. Paul, welcome back. We were praying for you, my friend. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for that, George. Good to be here.
How close did those fires get to you?
Not close. I'm on the North Shore. The fires were on the other side of the island. There were fires in Kula up country that were closer, and I was sheltering people here during that.
What a tragedy. My God. My God. Tell us what happened to you back years ago for that experience in 1987.
Well, I had just quit drinking. I was 25. I had started praying, and I was raised an atheist, so I didn't believe in any of that stuff. But I started doing that, and then I heard this voice telling me to get my act together, and I listened to it. And a few months later, there was this thing happening. People were calling it the harmonic convergence, and they said people were going to be waking up. And I thought in my naivete, well, if there is a God or such a thing as God, and I was starting to wonder if there might be, and you asked to be woken up, why would it want to say no? And I went up to the roof of my house where I was living in New York City at the time with a crystal and a mantra. Somebody had given me one of those things each, and I tried to teach myself to meditate the night before this event. And I had what people have described as a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I may never really know what happened, but it was an experience of energy moving through my body and out through the top of my head that left me frozen up there on the roof and swaying in this energy. And I felt safe, and I knew something was happening, and I started to see little lights around people after that, like fireflies. So I was beginning to open up, and it was an awakening to a whole other life, I have to say, and it wasn't very graceful, and it wasn't terribly pleasant for a while, because my life as I had known it was being challenged in very real ways.
And, of course, you have become one of the world's most renowned channelers. It's truly remarkable. Your book here is the 11th book, the Book of Innocence. And though you are writing the book, the channel of the spirits are writing through you, aren't they?
Well, there's actually no writing involved at all. I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, I hear one phrase repeated, I give voice to that one phrase, and everything else tumbles out on top of it. And the unedited transcripts of the recordings of these sessions become the books. And I think the last 8 books, 7 or 8, were done entirely in front of audiences. So I don't write these things. I literally am a stenographer taking verbal dictation. And that's how these things come into being.
When we take calls, Paul, you'll take some questions from our great listeners. We don't want to talk about the dead or anything like that from them. But you actually go into like a trance-like state or something, don't you?
Yeah, I work 2 different ways. When I'm here, I'm a radio. Think of me like a radio. When I'm channeling the guides, they're the station that I'm tuned into, and sometimes I whisper the words as they come and repeat them. And that's one way that I work. And when I work psychically, they call me a medium for the living. So I don't get your dead Aunt Alice, but if Alice is living 2 states away and you haven't spoken for 5 years, I may be able to tune into her and tell you what's really going on and support a healing in that dynamic.
Now, when you deal with channeling over the years, have you noticed a change in the spirits or how you work?
Yeah, big time. When I started, I didn't believe in channeling, really. I studied a form of energy healing, and when I had my hands on people's bodies, I started to hear things for them that would pan out. And that was the beginning of clairaudience. And I had a little group that met in my apartment in New York City for 18 years, where people would come and I would start to hear, but mostly we were working with the energy. When I was 48 years old and I started doing this, much younger, I quit smoking, and I've been a heavy smoker, and suddenly they started dictating full lectures, and very shortly after I was willing to transcribe them and record them, they began dictating the books.
Fascinating indeed. Now, the name of this book is called The Book of Innocence. Tell me about that title.
I was surprised by the title, too. I don't know the title until they announce it. I really don't. And I go, oh, brother, what's this one going to be about? But they say that there's an aspect in all of us that is in what they call it the upper room. They say it's the octave of consciousness or vibration above what they call the common field, which is our idea of the reality that we're engaging in. And this part of us has never been tainted by fear and doesn't know itself in the kind of separation that we've really been indoctrinated in this reality that we've known. So this aspect of us is in innocence and in wonder and in awe. And this is the part of us, they say, that is lifted to what they call, the upper room, which is a level of consciousness. But what they also say is that in the common field that we know, everything we see around us was named by somebody who came before us. We're living in a museum of other people's ideas. And the true self, or the monad, or the God within, whatever you want to call it, that innocent aspect of us, isn't tied to those beliefs, those meanings, and those structures. And consequently, when that aspect of us is moving into articulation or manifestation as and through us, it's also reclaiming our idea of memory, or what's supposed to be. They say every memory we have is actually informed by a false belief in separation, that we're separate from the source of all things and separate from one another. So they're really working in this book with reclaiming memory, which is inclusive of our idea of who we've been or the terrible things that happened to us, and not about forgetting them or whitewashing them, but coming to them from a very different perspective. The guides say everything is holy, but we can deny the divine in anything, which is, what we're used to doing.
Paul, can you describe what the spirit guides are, who they are, what were they? Were they humans who died? Are they angels? What are they?
Well, they call themselves teachers. They've come with a name, and they've used a name through me for a long time, and they call themselves Melchizedek, which is a priesthood. I'm not that attached to the names. They've said some of us have been informed, some of us have not. Some have only known themselves in consciousness. There's one I've seen, and he's the only one that I've seen over the years in a very specific way. But it's a consortium. It's a collective. They come with a we. Occasionally, I can notice the slight differences in vocabulary as they work, or the differences in the accents that occasionally come through. But they're, you can say ascended masters, although I don't like that term either because it's gotten kind of loaded with things. So I think of them not as sort of dead people, but of beings that have moved to a level of consciousness beyond, I guess you could call it the astral, or beyond what we think of as, where you go when you die. And they're here to help.
I remember when you were first on with me years ago, and the channeling occurred.
Yeah.
It kind of scared me when I first heard it.
Yeah. Well, it scared me too. And not when I heard it. It was when it started happening. I was going, what the heck is this? This isn't my normal way of operating. But they're not scary, and they're extraordinarily loving. And they come with a message of real healing and transformation. They say the world is on the brink of enormous change.
I believe that. Are you aware of what they're saying through you when you're doing it?
I'm taking dictation, and I hear phrase after phrase after phrase. So if you can imagine somebody reading 300 fortune cookies one after the next rapidly, that's what my experience is like. I retain about a third of it from a lecture. So I'm present, but I'm receded. I'm not in a deep trance. I'm not like Edgar Cayce who went to sleep. I'm here, but I'm slightly removed. When I'm reading, I'm more present. So if you can imagine that when I'm channeling, I'm climbing into the back seat of the car and turning the wheel over, and when I'm reading, I'm sharing the front seat.
Do you tape yourself so you can have a record of this?
Everything's recorded, yeah. I mean, I don't do this for myself personal readings for myself. That's not how I work. The work that comes through me has always been for others, and since the very beginning. But I channel a lot, and I do, workshops that are live and online, and everything is recorded and transcribed, and it's now, there's an enormous archive at this point. I mean, I just finished channeling the 12th book about 4 or 5 days ago, and I don't know how many thousands of pages of material there are from the books, and then on top of everything else, all the other lectures that they've offered. So they're prolific, and they like to talk, and my job is to sit there in the chair and try to keep up with it.
We're talking about the second book in the Manifestation Trilogy. It's called The Book of Innocence. Paul's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. It's his name, Paul, SELIG.com. He's on Facebook. He's got a presence on Twitter as well. How often are you dealing with the spirit guides? Every day?
Yeah, every day. I'm not always channeling every day. I still, have clients that I work with, so I'm reading for them. But most of my work now is channeling. The book that was just delivered, that was 5 weeks of dictation, took place over 22 days of sessions, and all in front of, different groups of students. So I've been kept very busy by this.
Your spirit guides talk about what is called reclamation of memory. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, the idea that all of our memory is tainted through this lens of separation, or is operating in this belief that we're separate from Source and everything else is. And it's also tainted by this idea of fear. And the guides I work with say that the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we've made in fear gets us more of the same. So if you can imagine that we're swimming in a swimming pool that was polluted before we even got in it, but we think that's all we get, they're actually clearing the water up. And a lot of the water actually is how we hold things in memory and the meaning that things have been given culturally, collectively, historically. I mean, we all know that, history is generally written by the victor, the one who wins the war.
That's right.
And our realization of what really is there is highly distorted. I think who we think we are, what we think we're capable of, how limited we've believed ourselves to be, is all informed by this kind of memory, which has become a belief system and a kind of a false ceiling that we continue to bump up against. And the guides are, I believe, taking us beyond that, to what exists beyond that, which is our true nature.
Have you ever had a guide you didn't like?
Not a personal guide, no. People sometimes say, would you ask my guides? And I really, for the most part, just hear my own. Occasionally, I'll tune into somebody, and this is more psychic than channeling, and I'll get a very abrupt and angry energy that's, and it's challenging. And these have been at times, people who've been dealing with things like, eating disorders and things that are really hurting the body. And when I try to tune into that part of them says, get away from me now. You're not coming near this. Or, this is going to continue until, it's lower energy stuff. That's the best way that I can describe it. And I don't encounter it often, but I have. But the guides I work with are teachers. They're not the personal guides who tell you, what car to buy, or, where to put the couch in the living room. I think people have those guides. That's not what these folks are. They're higher beings, and they really come with an agenda, which is really far beyond me. It's really for all of us.
What do you prefer, your psychic abilities or your channeling abilities?
What I like about the psychic abilities is that it can be verified. So I've been filmed stepping into people that were, if you ask about a relative and I step into the relative and I'm being filmed, you'll see how I may somatize the relative, start to look like that person, start to gesture like them. So I like all that stuff. And the readings are practical. They're addressing our practical lives and relationships. And for me personally, they've helped me trust the channeled work, which is so far out there. The fact that I can close my eyes and dictate a whole book that doesn't require editing is
it's magnificent.
Nuts,
Absolutely.
the small things I can manage. So, sometimes it's where did I leave my car keys? I don't do a lot of that stuff. I mostly work with relational things. But I've worked with, parents with kids who have never spoken, people with locked-in syndrome, people with comas. You're able to access information. As long as somebody has a body, I seem to be able to have some kind of access. I have to tell people that I'm not a psychic spy. People call and they say, it's my husband cheating, and I'm not going to go there.
Remote view on
tune in. Yep.
What do you, when we take calls next hour, are you the psychic or the channeler?
It depends on what the question is. If it's about world stuff, if it's about consciousness, if it's about spiritual growth, the guides come through. I don't think they care if we get the promotion at work. I think they've got bigger fish to fry. But if somebody's asking about their boss, that's psychic. If you're asking about, how you can move beyond the unhappiness or where you're stuck, the guides can often come through with that stuff too.
But you're flexible with that.
Yeah, I'm flexible.
Okay, great. Now, what do the guides mean by a world made new?
That's the book that they just finished. That's the title of the 12th book.
That's the one after the Book of Innocence?
The one after that, but there's probably a title, A World Made New, in the last book. They tend to build on their teachings. A world made new is what we're coming to, and it's a world, they say, that's claimed at a higher level of consciousness. They say, we've been at war for so long that we can't imagine a world without it. They said we've been at war since somebody picked up the first rock and threw it at somebody else. So to move beyond that, because we tend to get what we expect, and we expect what we've had, we have to move to a level of consciousness where other things are possible, and that's what they're doing in the work. They actually say that you align at a level of consciousness and vibration where you become a conduit or a doorway for what they call the upper room, or this is, call it the higher octave of spirit, the expression of spirit. And they say it is that level of consciousness that actually reclaims everything. They say sometimes things like God sees God in all of its creation. So the aspect of you or anyone who knows who they are beyond the personality structure is actually witnessing the inherent divine in manifestation. It's a trippy teaching. It kind of gets into physics, I think, but I failed science, so I don't think of it that way.
You failed something? I highly doubt that.
I was a stoner in high school. It's astonishing that I got into any school, let alone graduate school. But yeah, no, math and science were not my things at all, and they're still not.
Do you have a favorite spirit guide?
The one that I see, the one with the beautiful blue eyes. He's the one I've seen. And when I channel live, people have seen my eyes, I'm told, turn a very, very pale blue. People think I have blue eyes, and I have dark hazel eyes. They'll come and look at me and say, that's not the color I was seeing. But when I'm channeling, sometimes they'll be right in front of people and looking at them, and that's something that happens. But I recognized him when I saw him, and I was under hypnosis, and somebody brought him through, and I was surprised. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. And I saw those eyes, and I saw how deeply compassionate they were.
Paul, we're going to take a short break here, and we'll be right back to talk more about your work. The new book is called The Book of Innocence. Paul Selig with us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie along with Paul Selig, one of our favorite guests. His latest book is called The Book of Innocence. Now, this is book 2 in his Manifestation trilogy, a channel text that comes to him. He's also the author of a number of other books, and he's already taken care of another one, which will come out. What's that date, Paul?
This time next year.
All right. We'll have to have you back again, my friend.
Thank you.
What are call attunements?
Well, the guides work with attunements, and they're energetic attunements which are invoked through language. So you can think of them, I guess, as incantations. But they're claims of truth. The guides say what is true is always true. And when you speak them, you can feel the energy that accompanies them. And each attunement is working to facilitate an acceleration in the energetic field and the awareness that accompanies it. So the attunements are actually in all of the books, and they escalate as they go forward. And the attunements now are really well beyond personal realization, but moving towards how a world is realized at a higher level of consciousness.
When you first started channeling, did you think you were going nuts?
I was fortunate that I was studying with a teacher, this old Irish lady, who had been one of the first Reiki masters in the U.S. And I just had a context that there was something going on, and I had people to talk with. And I've had mentors show up throughout my life at varying stages, and I'm very grateful for that, because I think it's hard to go into this stuff without some kind of support, because it can be scary. The channeling wasn't scary, but the information that I get is not scary. And I'm wary when people are channeling messages that are fear-based, that are causing conflict and blaming, because that tends to be low-level stuff. And so you have to be in discernment when you do this about the level of frequency or spirit that you're attending to. I like to say, my grandma was married 5 times. She's not who I want to go to for relationship advice. On the other side, she'd be happy to give it, but,
Or if you're going to go to someone who's been married before.
Yeah. Yep.
Have you ever channeled and you felt uncomfortable with it? You felt uneasy with it?
Yeah, often.
What causes that?
When I'm challenged by the information, when the information feels contradictory to what I would normally believe, that's usually happening when they're pushing me outside of my comfort zone, and every book has pushed me outside farther and farther. So those things make me uncomfortable. I'm cautious when I work. People want me to channel on world events and this and that. And the guides, it's funny, I actually listened to a recording. I never listened to myself. There was a video that popped up of a channeling that I gave end of March 2020, when COVID was first hit. And it was right before I moved to Maui. It's a fascinating lecture. It's up on YouTube. I'm sure that's where it lives. But it was amazing to read that, because it was giving very sage advice on how to manage that time and all of the confusion at that time. But as I was delivering it, I'm sure I was miserable, because I'm going, who am I and what is this and why are they giving us this information? But it was required. So I'm not the guy to channel on, this idea or that idea that is, running around on the National Enquirer, but I may be the guy to support other people in awakening up to their own true nature.
Paul, you had mentioned that this planet is going to undergo some huge things. Is it positive or negative?
What I've been told is that humanity has decided at a collective level, and I guess this is almost like, I don't talk about things like oversoul, but they say humanity has made a choice to make it, because we know that if we don't change, we're not going to, that we've created the capacity to destroy ourselves, and we're not going to do that. So that I found very encouraging, but they did say it's going to be about 4 generations for us to begin to realize the new, and that we're in a period now of real transition, real challenge, and that I don't get that gets easier. I think it gets easier when we understand that we're essentially on board a ship going across an ocean that's rocky and difficult and stormy, but we're going to another level of humanity, of being ourselves. They say it's actually a change in the species that we're undergoing. And I don't mean to sound too far out, but they say we're coming into an awareness of who we've always been and that we have been denying. And that's very positive. And they say this is happening to everybody now.
Do the guides come to you, or do you go to them?
It's almost an agreement, they've never stood me up, and I'm really grateful for that, in front of an audience. If I say I'm going to show up at 8 and I do my little preparation, which is a quick prayer that I say to myself, they're there. So I think we're meeting. When I first started, when I was in my early 30s, and I'm 61 now, I used to feel like I had a tin can up to my ear, and I was hoping somebody would pick up the other can with a string, and I'd be able to hear. And now it's present. I'm a radio. It's just like tuning a dial, and boom, I have access. So they're always there.
Paul, why are they there? What are they trying to do? What do they want us to learn?
They want us to know who we are and who we have always been and what we've denied. You know, this isn't a religious teaching. They talk about God, and they say, call it whatever you want, and they talk about the God within, and they say, call that what you want. But that we're in a period of rearticulation. We're reawakening to our own true nature at the cost of the old, and that's a real challenge. So they're here to teach us how to get through this, and I think how to know ourselves and each other in a much higher and more loving way.
Where are they in terms of logistics? Are they in another dimension?
Yeah, that's how I understand it. You know, they say that they meet for the classes, for the dictation. They meet in what they call the upper room, and they've called that Christ consciousness. They've called it the octave above the common field, but that they say they actually express in a higher reality than that, but that's where we can meet them, and I can take the dictation from.
Neil Donald Walsh has said that he had a conversation with God. Did he, or was he dealing with the spirit world and thought it was God?
You know, I don't know his work, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to ask my guides about that, and I don't know that that's fair. I tend not to comment on other channels' work. But I think everything is of God, and I think that's true. I don't think of God as having personality. I think that that's not how it operates. I think that you can tune into an aspect of the Creator that can come in a way that can be understood, which is, I suspect, what I do. I don't think of them as spirit guides at a low-level tone. You know, the guides have described themselves in several ways, and sometimes they say we are who you become when you know who you are, and other times they've called themselves the true self, and the true self is the God within, or you can call it the Christ within. It's that level of awareness and love. So I trust that, and I'm cautious, truthfully, and it may sound surprising. I'm cautious when anybody says they're hearing God or they're hearing this or they're hearing that. I think it has to be checked out, you know. And there were a bunch of guys in a mental institution claiming they were Jesus all at the same time. They made a movie of it finally. But, you know, I think that we all have the ability to access higher truth. But I don't think that that means that just because somebody is hearing something that it's necessarily of the highest source. And that's where discernment is very useful.
Paul, if an asteroid were zooming toward planet Earth, would they come to you and say, Paul, you got to get this word out, like right now?
I don't think so. It hasn't happened yet. Well, I don't think so. They did tell me that there was – I've gotten two things. I was told about 9/11 before it happened, but I didn't believe it. And I got it through the back door. Somebody was asking whether their business was going to make it in Lower Manhattan and if they would make the rent on the business in October, and the answer was no, because there's going to be a terrorist attack in Lower Manhattan. But I didn't believe it. You know, I think they even gave the date. But I wasn't expecting, I wasn't looking for it. And before COVID, I was told that something very challenging was going to come and hit New York in a very, very big way, and everybody would be affected. And I said, please, I don't want to be here for it. Let me be someplace pretty. And I was in Costa Rica when it happened, and then I ended up moving to Maui. I couldn't go back to Manhattan because it was in lockdown, and I never left Maui, really. It became my home. But I don't know that I would get that. I think I have a fairly good intuitive sense. The guide said recently, when somebody asked, they said, you know, I said, well, I think they saved me from something really terrible once. And they said, actually, about 20 times we've done that, but you don't even know it. And I can trust that. But I don't think that I'm more special or more valuable than anybody else. I have this weird gift, and I hope that if something is coming, I will be elsewhere. But if it's an asteroid, where are we going to go? You know?
Exactly. Have you ever been on a plane when you get into the channeling mode, and what do people sitting next to you think?
I don't tune into people Do I just tune into the person next to me? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I mean, do they go listen to you going, because I've heard you channel before, and it's different.
I'm not doing it on an airplane. I'm not doing it. I mean, I'm doing it in front of in an auditorium.
So you're not spontaneous like that.
No. If I'm working psychically, if somebody asked me a question and I was on an airplane and I had to tune in, I could do it.
Right.
I have this odd habit of muttering what I hear as I hear it and then repeating it, but I don't always do that with the psychic stuff. So I could do that, and I think it would be fine and effective. But channeling, there's no need to do it there. I can't imagine a situation where I would be called to deliver a teaching on an airplane, unless there was a person sitting next to me who was asking and the guides had something to say to them, and I suppose then it would happen and it would sound like whatever it sounded like.
Are the guides happy about our future?
I think so, actually. I think they hold deep love for us. I think they have concern. I get that at times, but the concern is primarily about how we treat each other. One of their teachings is who you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. What you damn and who you damn damns you back. And that's just a teaching of accord, a vibrational accord, like you like.
It's like karma.
It is karma. Yeah, it is like karma. But they say karma is opportunity to learn. They talk about karma as opportunity for education. But if you think of it, the guides have said 1,000,000 times through me, you cannot be the light and hold another in darkness. It's the height of hypocrisy. You can't do it. And we do it. Self-righteousness, they say, is always the personality self. Because the true self or the divine self doesn't have a stake in being right in the way that the personality does.
Paul, your previous books, can people still get them?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. They're all up. They're all available online, and you can get them on my site, but through the major booksellers. So they're easy to get, and they're all in print.
Now, the book that you're going to come out with in a year, is that called Book 3 of the Manifestation Trilogy?
Yeah, Book 3.
Good for you. Now, will there be a Book 4 or a different?
I think this may be the last trilogy. They said when they finished A World Made New that this was a completion of the teaching that began with the first book. And then they said, I thought I was going to be off the hook for a while, and then they said, and we have 3 other books prepared. So I don't know that it'll be a trilogy, but they're teaching new stuff. They're teaching about unity and unity consciousness and how that happens. But I don't know yet because they haven't started those teachings.
Is it possible that they would simply abandon you one day and they'll be gone?
I suppose anything's possible. It hasn't happened yet. I'm never going to get another job in academia after all this channeling. It's not going to happen. I left that ship sailed. So I hope they stick around, but I mostly hope they stick around because I'm still so curious about this. I can do the psychic work without their direction and, have. But I think that this is a relationship that I have with them that probably predates this lifetime. And I suppose because I do have free will, if I say, that's it, I can't do this anymore, I suppose that would be the end. But it hasn't happened yet. So we'll see. And they've delivered 12 books in, I think, 13, 14 years, and I wouldn't mind a break. And I'm actually going to write my own book after this. I'm going to tell my story, which is uncomfortable to do, but that's my next assignment, and we'll see.
That book's going to be like an autobiography?
It'll be a memoir, yeah, about what this was like and how it happened.
It's been an interesting ride for you, hasn't it?
Unbelievable. Really unbelievable, and not always easy. And now I look at my life, and I'm fairly astonished at what's happened. And I couldn't have planned it, and I couldn't have chosen it. I wouldn't have known that it was possible. I wouldn't have known, So it helps me to trust this.
We're going to take calls with Paul Selig next hour. He'll need your name and a quick question. We will not talk about the dead. He's not a medium, and we won't go there. But what other questions do you prefer, Paul?
I like relational questions. General questions, what am I here for, I'm not crazy about. But I haven't talked to my kid isn't speaking to me, or why am I stuck in my romantic life, or what's happening in the relationship with this person I'm trying to date. All those things are fair game. They call me a medium for the living, so as long as somebody still has a body, I can usually tune into them with the first name, sometimes last initial.
Jobs, whether I should move from a house, things like that too?
Yeah. I can do that.
Great. We've got a few email questions that have come in for you too. We'll go through some of those, but your phone calls are priority, so folks, make the calls if you can get in. I think the lines may be already jammed. Paul Selig with us. We'll be doing that next hour. Paul, and like we said, you've been doing this since 1987?
Not channeling. I started waking up in 87. I started hearing in 87, but the way that I work now took some time. But I've been doing this since I was maybe 31 is when I first had my first group.
I bet you're fun at parties.
That's very funny. No, I'm terrible at parties. I'm really terrible. I'm very shy, actually. I'm a good host. I'm a rotten guest. I lurk in the corner.
We'll be back in a moment. More with Paul Selig on Coast to Coast AM.